Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening for those of you who are online. Hello. I'm really pleased that you can join us for the third Future Enterprise webinar series that we've been running here between QUT Business School and MIT Sloan School of Management. So I'm Professor Rowena Barrett. I'm QUT's Pro Vice Chancellor Entrepreneurship, and I'm going to moderate this conversation that we have this morning about the sustainable enterprise. And as we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land where we're all meeting. In Brisbane, the Turrbal and the Yuggera people are the traditional owners of the land, and in Cambridge, the traditional custodians of the land are the Massachusetts people. So I pay my respect to all elders, past, present and emerging, including those who are here with us in the room or online today. And I note ongoing practices of resilience, resistance and innovation amongst First Nations people to ensure recognition of their sovereign and unceded lands, histories and cultures being integral to collectively creating better futures. So over the last 6 years, I've been privileged to lead the creation of a strong and deep collaboration between QUT and MIT, of which this Future Enterprise webinar series is a part. And what we do in this webinar series is explore the frontier of organisations for tomorrow's leaders. So the webinar series is an opportunity to hear from two academic leaders about what they think particular characteristics of future enterprises mean and how they believe that you as leaders of future enterprises can operationalise these concepts in your venture. So in today's webinar, we're focused on the sustainable enterprise, and our speakers will consider this in the context of research, measurement, markets, consumer preferences. And we're really delighted that we have QUT's Professor Sagadevan Mundree here with us and MIT's Professor Roberto Rigobon, who's travelled all the way from MIT in the US to share his ideas with us in the room. So welcome to both our speakers today. So we have a very time-critical morning with us. And our first speaker today is Professor Sagadevan Mundree. Saga is a globally renowned agricultural biotechnologist who was educated in South Africa, the US, and who wears a number of different hats here at QUT. So Saga is the acting head of the School of Biology and Environmental Science and is the director of the Centre for Agriculture and the Bioeconomy here at QUT. His work is critical to feeding the world sustainably and to developing cleaner, greener bioproducts. He specialises in developing commercially suitable varieties of tropical pulse crops, chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, cowpeas, mung beans, all those tasty beans and peas. And he works with partners in industry and government to develop crops that are more resilient to environmental stresses such as drought and salinity, and crops that are more nutritious. Saga will tell us some of this work, particularly around the Indigenous groups that he's working with on native Australian rices. And I can think of no one better to talk to us about sustainability and what it means to be sustainable and the role that purpose, planet and people play in sustainability efforts. So Saga, the airwaves are yours for the next 14 minutes. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rowena. Roberto, wonderful to meet you and to have you share the stage with you. Folks, I feel very humble and honored to be able to share with you some of my thoughts and perspectives. As you know, for the last couple of years, very disrupted world, a very disrupted food systems, a very disrupted food value chain system. And I think without a shadow of doubt, COVID, climate change, conflict in the world has actually forced us to think about these global challenges that has now actually started to impact on us locally. And as you would imagine, this has actually had huge impacts, and it's got countries like us and other parts of the world thinking about sovereignty, thinking about how we could actually improve the resilience of our food systems. The examples I'm going to just share with you will actually hopefully bring across some of what I would refer to as the 4 key tenets that are essential for a sustainable enterprise. In 2020, I crossed paths with the food studies teacher of Calvin Grove State College. For our colleagues in the US, this is the second largest public school in the Southern Hemisphere, just located at the outskirts of QUT. And I said, why don't we think about disrupting these students' lives a bit from a food perspective? Many of you would know that here in Queensland, we've got a tropical, subtropical climate. So two of the significant pulses that we grow are chickpea and mung bean. And in fact, 85% of all the mung bean in Australia is grown in Queensland, and 65% of all the desi variety of chickpea. The sad thing is that most of this is actually put into a container, shipped abroad, and value added, and more than likely brought back to Australia in some form or the other. So what we did is that we tweaked the Year 9 Food Studies program. I gave these students a lecture about sustainability, the importance that pulses actually play in our agroecological system, in fixing nitrogen, enhancing our soil, nourishment and nutrient profile, etc. And left them for 3 months to develop recipes from these pulse-based flours that they enjoyed and they liked, and to use their tuck shop as a system to be able to gauge what is that consumer at the end of the day actually wanting. At the end of the 3 months, I invited a close mate of mine who is the food technologist of a local company called Mudgeon's. Mudgeon's, as you would know, has made Brisbane the bhujia capital of the world. It's a type of snack food that is now available at Costco's across the globe and most of our local supermarkets. Lo and behold, when I looked at the products that these students and recipes that they developed, it was just absolutely mind-blowing. In fact, they developed 24 recipes. And the other key factor I wanted to include in this conversation is that Calvin Grove State College also has an indigenous garden, and I encouraged them to put indigenous ingredients into what they were developing. To cut a long story short, we have now identified 2 of those recipes that we are now having conversations around commercialization. And these students, it is Year 9 Food Studies students, have now seen the entrepreneurship, the necessity to be able to actually partner with industry, partner with the consumer, and importantly, to be able to look at and think about these products. The second example that I have for you is really around an indigenous project that I'm part of, and I have a team of colleagues from across Australia, including indigenous communities that we work with. Many of you may not be aware of this, but there are 4 species of rice that's actually native and indigenous to Australia, that has been used by our indigenous communities not for hundreds of years, tens of thousands of years. In fact, to be honest, 65,000 years ago, these native rice varieties were consumed quite widely and continue to be consumed, but mainly harvested from the wild. Not surprisingly, the nutritional profile, it's just amazing. It's got a higher protein content, it's got high anthocyanins. When you see them, they're actually dark in color. Yet, surprisingly, it's not in our supermarkets. There's no value addition that has taken place. So we have been working with our indigenous communities to be able to put this out in broad acre on their land and to be able to help navigate the provenance from where it's been grown through to products that are being developed. In fact, this morning I'm hosting a visitor from Manitoba, the CEO of Mayera, who's First Nations Canadian, his name is Bruce Hardy, and he's just arrives this morning he would have arrived around 7:30 from a flight from Vancouver. And he is going to be sharing his success stories of where native rice from Manitoba has already been developed as an ingredient and already developed into products, together with cocoa and chocolate from Vanuatu, and delivering through provenance what we refer to as indigenous products that actually start to improve the economic status of our communities. Now, the purpose behind this is really that we have teamed up with a company called Soba, based out of Noosa, that actually makes non-alcoholic beer. It's led by another indigenous Australian. So imagine if we could take this rice grown by Padicle on the outskirts of Darwin, tracked and traced along this value chain, and suddenly we produce a gluten-free beer that's already in our BWS and some of these supermarkets that actually sell these. What a story around provenance. So my message really is about the 4 key legs that actually help to keep that seat that you're sitting on quite stable. For starters, it's about people. It's about partnerships. It's about the products. and importantly, the provenance, that we as consumers are quite very pedantic about, and COVID has actually accelerated this. How are we contributing to the sustainability of the planet? How are we contributing to ensure that we can actually create economic opportunities and sovereignty along our supply chain, particularly associated with food? I hope this message resonates with you, and these two examples give you an opportunity of actually understanding how these could play an important role in helping to generate the next generation of entrepreneurs, but importantly, helping to contribute to sustainable enterprises. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Saga. And it's ironic, of course, there's lots of food for thought in there. And we look forward to your questions. Remember to use Slido. And for those who are on the webinar, to post them in the Q&A, we'll be able to see those and ask the questions there. But thank you, Saga. Can I now turn to our second speaker? Professor Roberto Rigobon has joined us here at QUT from his base at MIT Sloan School of Management. And he's on a bit of a sabbatical travelling the world. He wasn't in Cairns this morning. I'm just saying that for Stu and Scott on the line. He was actually here in Brisbane, but he is heading from us to Paris later in the week. Roberto is a Venezuelan economist whose areas of research are international economics, monetary economics, and development economics. Roberto focuses on the causes of balance of payment crises, financial crises, and the propagation of them across countries. So what causes a crisis and how do they move? So we know in the literature this is called contagion. So he's a slightly different virus, I think, than the one we've experienced recently. He's very good at conveying what he knows from having won MIT's Teacher of the Year on 3 occasions, most recently being this year. Currently, Roberto is studying properties of international pricing practices, trying to produce alternative measures of inflation. We know it's large, but perhaps an alternative version is really quite an interesting thing. He's one of the 2 founding members of the Billion Prices Project and the co-founder of Price Stats. And he'll tell us some more about these, but effectively what he's doing is using big data for real-time macro and international economics. So I look forward to hearing more from you. Over to you, Roberto.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Saga. I come from Venezuela, and in Venezuela we always eat plantains, rice and bean. I never thought that beans could be cool, but thank you. So that's our daily intake. So thank you so much. My wife had this wonderful idea to spend a sabbatical, spending 2 months in each country of her choice, actually. So I was not particularly involved in the decision, but she just told me which countries we had to travel, and Australia is our second country visiting. So it's a great pleasure to spend these 2 months here and get to know your country much better. Let me talk a little bit. I work on measurement, so all my life I've tried to think about how you measure things. I believe that we measure life horribly, truly. We don't measure sadness or happiness. We mostly measure when people commit suicides or are diagnosed with a depression. We don't measure the quality of a relationship. We mostly know when the relationship breaks. We don't measure our impact on the environment. We mostly wait until the lake is lost. We don't measure social unrest or when the society is unhappy. We wait until they are rioting in the streets, as it is happening in many countries right now. We don't measure the quality of a political system. We wait until we have 2 idiots as candidates, and then we would like to resample, okay? Like, give me anyone available, except these 2. So it is incredible that in the last 65,000 years, we've actually made good decisions. To me, it's mostly the outcome of good luck, not of wisdom. So I devote my life to try to measure things, and I started measuring how a shock propagates from one country to the other. I try to think about how we can measure inflation better, not necessarily getting a lower number. That's Rowena. That's not my goal in life in general.
I think it's ours.
Yes, I know that you want lower inflation, but but truly is how do we understand it better? That's kind of, and in particular, Australia was one of the first countries that we studied, because Australia and New Zealand are the only two developed nations that still produce only a quarterly measure of inflation rate. We actually measure that daily, and it can be measured daily. So, but the last 7 years I have devoted my life to measure social issues and environmental issues and governance issues. And this happened by happenstance that I was approached by law enforcement when I was giving a conference on inflation, and people said, have you ever measured human rights violations or human trafficking or child labor, etc.? I said, because these are things that we have no clue. We know they're happening. We have no clue how they're happening, where they're happening. Can you help us? And to be honest, the day I started working on that, it was hard for me to think about anything else. So I have devoted my last 7 years of life to try to devote the unethical behavior in our societies. So how, and again, it's kind of a very negative approach because I don't measure goodness. I try to measure the worst of humankind. And I think it's important because by measuring that, we will be able to understand if our actions and our decisions have any impact whatsoever. But instead of talking about the depressing aspect of my research, let me talk about the positive aspect of my research. One of the things that has been very surprising in the last 7 years is to see how the world is measuring itself regarding environmental, social, and governance issues. I don't know how much you know, but in particular, there are two markets. And in fact, let me talk about a third one, which is actually on food, that is very related. But we created something that is called voluntary carbon markets, where firms, what they do is they buy credits for the fact that they are, taking CO2 out of the environment. So every time you have a forest, the forest is kind of absorbing some of the CO2, and I can actually take care of a forest, improve a forest management, or actually just protect an area that was unprotected before. And firms are doing that with the hope of saying, well, at least I'm doing something that is taking the CO2 out of the environment. And then they make claims, I am actually taking CO2 out of the environment. That's kind of the claim. The ESG world has evolved tremendously. We have more than 220 data providers that measure every aspect you can imagine, from treatment of workers to marketing practices, if you're lying or not, for example, to things like electromagnetic field pollution. I mean, how many of you care about electromagnetic field pollution? This is the pollution generated by these devices. Does anybody cares about the electromagnetic field pollution? Well, somebody actually cares, because somebody's actually measuring this crap. I mean, it's truly surprising to me, because I really don't care. You can give me 20 phones, I can actually use all 20 phones at the same time for what I care. But people care about these issues. There are very important aspects like indigenous rights, for example, and the impact on biodiversity, and CO2 emissions, water treatment, etc. So all that is encompassed in something that the industry calls ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. How we make decisions, how we treat women in the labor force is a very important one on that, where we look at, for example, women in the boards, the proportion of women in top management, the wage gap differences, etc. All those two massive markets, massive, these are trillions of dollars. And when I say trillions of dollars, I'm not exaggerating. There are more than $10 trillion of financial investments that are directed or affected by any of these two measurements that we have. This is all voluntary. Not a single regulator has said a single word on any of this. This is all happening because we humans think that our behavior is inappropriate. And therefore, we are, and by the way, when I said we, not necessarily all of us, but a significant proportion of the consumers and the workers think that these attributes, treating women properly, treating indigenous, which is incredible what happens in Australia. I have been in many, many conferences here. I wish we had in the United States the awareness that you have as a nation for what has happened to the indigenous people, because it's just truly remarkable, truly remarkable how much you recognize and take care. And I think that that's an important aspect of the society that doesn't happen in the United States. This is the first time I hear someone actually caring about the indigenous people in Massachusetts, and I had to go to Brisbane to hear that, which is, sad, but good on the other hand. All of these attributes are important to our workers, our consumers, and somehow they are telling the firms that they care about these issues so much that we're developing institutions that measure exactly those behaviors. The same happened with food. Do you remember all these eco labels, like organic food and so on? All that was created in the same way. I know this sounds, was created in an organic way, not because it was an organic label. It's because, in a very disorganized fashion, we decided, we care about fair trade, we care about how we treat farmers, we care about how this is produced, we care about the pesticides and stuff like that. So in all that process, we created a set of institutions that started to measure our own behavior. And this was done without a single regulator. Why am I emphasizing this? Because these are the type of institutions that are long-lasting. These are the type of institutions that we as humans, as a society, we decide, as a species, we decide we need to change. And those are the long-lasting institutions. The other ones are certain rules that some politician, I think that direction, actually writes in a piece of paper, and then they hope that it will be enforced. These are not rules that need enforcement, because these are rules that are self-enforcing. This is, as a society, we're deciding to change. So this is my challenge to you, and let me just finish with this. We're in a process that has been a little bit disorganized, and in fact, if you read any paper that I've written on this area, I kind of highlight the fact that this is a little bit too disorganized. Okay, so that it is confusing. In fact, it's called aggregate confusion. The project that we have at MIT, is because it's hard to tell. How should you put women empowerment and CO2 in the same index? How do I think about that? So if I promote 2 more women to the board, does that allow me to pollute a little bit more? What does that mean to be in the same index? No, when you think about it, probably these 2 things should not be in the same index. They should be separate index. But somehow we're combining these things in a way that I feel that are implying certain trade-offs that are inappropriate, okay? But the whole point is, we are at a stage in which we have to think about how to measure ourselves. So this is important 3 things. 1, as companies and as leaders in your industries, you will be faced with the cost of misbehavior. Not necessarily now, but for certain in the future. Your workers, your board members, the stockholders, your investors, they care about these things, and they care deeply about these issues. So in Australia, where we have such an incredibly vibrant and large mining sector, it is important that we understand those impacts in the mining sector, for example. And the leaders of the mining sector are the ones that have to take decisions about how we have and develop best practices. By the way, we need mining. Okay, mining is going to be like beans, super cool in the future. Okay, and the reason is because the future of decarbonization is intensively in mining. We need all these rare metals. So I'm sorry, we need to actually mine them, otherwise we're dead. So, but we need to mine them now with a more mindful approach. And I think you, Australia and Canada, actually, those are my 2 hopes, have the ability to decide how to do this properly. If you're expecting this to happen in Russia, good luck, okay? So it is you, so here. And so 1 is to think about what are the best practices within your industries. And those industries that think about all the issues that we care as a society, pick 7. You don't have to pick 64. Pick 5 or 6 that are important for Australia, and start measuring your impact and start developing the best practices. And I think that that's the alternative. In fact, actually, just say out loud what you're doing, because then you will be rewarded. You will be rewarded by your consumers and your workers. Okay, so that's and actually be open about your measurement. And I just put the example of mining because I think there's an urgency here to scale mining worldwide, to get all the lithium that we need and all the cobalt that we need, all the nickel that we need, and it's going to happen in the south of the world. Okay, this is going to happen in South Africa, it's going to happen in Australia, it's going to happen in Latin America. So we need these places to decide how to produce in a sustainable manner. But lastly, what you need also, and what you need the regulator to do, or you need the industries to do, is that we force disclosure. And you can do that. Once you have become and you have decided what is the best strategy, make sure that everyone in your industry discloses. Because it's through disclosure that the workers will be able to decide. It's through disclosure that actually the ESG rating agencies will be able to rate you properly. And it's through that disclosure that you will affect not only Australia, but the rest of the world. By telling this is the way we produce lithium, which, by the way, you have a lot of lithium on the south next to Perth. So this is the way we produce lithium, and people said, oh, that's a better approach. And therefore that will affect Chile, because that's the other competitor. So Chile and Peru will change their practices, because in the world they will be seen as cheap. Certainly this is not costless. They will be seen as cheap, but bad. You will be seen as responsible and a little bit more expensive, but I think that actually will make a big difference to that. So my message is about a positive one, in which we as a society are deciding to change the way we behave. And what you truly need is a group of consumers and workers that are passionate about these issues, and then a small group of individuals that are willing to take on the challenge to change the way we disclose and the ways we produce. So I hope that the next time, I tend to come once every year to Australia. So I hope that the next time I come, I can see some of those changes happening. And if not, in 10 years from now, for sure, I would like to see those changes. So thank you so much for your time and the invitation for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think we've got a few challenges out there that many of you would like us to follow up in the questions. But Saga, can I just start with you? You know, in all the reading that we do around sustainability, it's often just referred to in the business world as doing well by doing good. Do you think this constrains the way we think about sustainability, where we put that firm economic performance at the top line?
Without a shadow of doubt, actually. I think it's multidimensional. And I think the ability for us to be able to track impact, and whether we are depending on the mining sector for certain raw materials to actually contribute towards an economically developed product. And the batteries and supercapacitors is a good example. We could take waste streams from agriculture, like the rice husks from rice that's grown out in Puddicombe. Because it's so rich in silica, in a one-step reaction, we can produce graphene-like carbon, a hard carbon, that can actually be used to develop a supercapacitor. And there's a company just on the outskirts of Brisbane that's doing that already. So I think it requires us using innovation in a way that actually allows us to think laterally, and to also become quite transparent on how we communicate this and track it across that supply chain. And just really, to build on the point that you made earlier on, Roberto.
Yeah, let me add something to that. I actually think it's profitable to do good. I don't see any discrepancy there, because so let me just put an example. I know it's an extreme example, but it's an example where we have agreement that a bad behavior is inappropriate. If I have a firm that is using child labor to produce clothing, and anyone here learns about that, please raise your hand if you are willing to buy the clothes from that company. What if the cloth is at only $1 per pound? Will you buy it? No one? You see? So behaving like a jerk tends to be a bad strategy. Now, the issue here is that if we have to wait until a crime has been committed for us to act, then we act too little. So we don't act enough. So the case of child labor is one in which you said, well, that's inappropriate. So if you're using child labor, I'm not going to buy your products. I will not lend you. I will exclude you. You're committing a crime. So be it. So truly, if you think about this long-term aspect, polluting in excess, producing plastics in excess, throwing husk in excess, not recycling enough, these are things that are not a binary decision, like do I use child labor or not? Is that clear? It's not a binary decision, is it a crime or not, but it's something that we know is inappropriate. So if we start disclosing those behaviors, our consumers will be able to discern. Some of them will still buy. That's perfectly fine with me. But some will decide not to purchase. And that's a permanent loss for the firms. So to me, when I look at the long term, what occurs is that the bad behavior today, how will that be reflected in profit? It's incredibly uncertain. And we are assuming that it's zero. Because we have no measurement, we're acting as if our bad behavior has no consequences. And therefore, but if you take that consequence into account, it is for sure profitable to do good.
Yeah.
So I don't see that. So it's exactly the same example here, is that there are opportunities that we're not seeing because we are not taking these rare event probabilities into account. And this is very human. We all make that mistake.
So do you think, though, that we're making an assumption about the knowledge of leaders of organisations, about the knowledge that consumers have, that they actually understand where products come from, how products are made, because I sort of think with that, sustainability being subservient to economic performance, firms still can get away with doing bad.
Yes.
Because it's the best way for them to do well.
Yes.
So is there a problem of knowledge here?
So I will not call it a problem of knowledge, but information flow, which I think is the same. Yes, it is. And I mean, let's go back 10,000 years ago. How did we actually purchase 10,000 years ago? It was a word of mouth and trying the products in a market. That's what we did. Then, thousands of years later, the Sears decided to put a catalog. That's how we got the information. So this process of information disclosure are very slow. Today, we have a much better characterization of the products. When we buy, our consumers go online, and by the way, even if you buy in the store, you can get that information. You look for attributes. And the attributes right now are, by the way, go at the beginning of go to 1970s, 1960s. What were the attributes? Were color, brand, clothing make, and size. That was more like, I'm talking about clothing. Today, actually, you go to these web pages and they start actually adding attributes that classify this, is the coffee organic or not? And in fact, that's actually a real thing. And people click on that real thing. And so now you have a verifier that says, yes, this coffee is organic, this coffee is not. And so the internet and the technology is helping us provide more information to the consumers on attributes that matter to them. So, for example, we had a research that was actually, I thought it was super cool, but I have not done it because it was kind of very depressing. But we had this app that you added to a purchase in the United States to the web pages, that whenever you purchase a product, it tells you which senators were they lobbying. So the idea is that the consumer said, well, what are the things that are important for you? For example, imagine that you said, well, LGBTQ rights, okay? You want civil rights. Then we said every company, we said, these are the people that they are lobbying, and this is their voting record on LGBTQ civil rights. So at least people said, well, I'm buying a bike from a company that is lobbying the senators that I don't like. Let me buy a different bike. And had a fantastic impact on the purchase of the consumers. Because we told them, who are they supporting? By the way, the firms didn't know. But first, they didn't know we were doing that. It's called hacking, by anyway. But no, this is public information. But they didn't know because the person that is designing the lobbying is not thinking about these issues. The person in the United States that is thinking about operations. They're not thinking about what the lobbying implies in terms of civil rights, for example, which in the United States now is so important. So we did this and we put it, we call it the responsible customer. Responsible consumer. We put the app and, it's just, it was a good, nice try, and we probably should continue doing it. But anyway.
So
the key thing there, Rowena, is particularly in the food area, you could see that the consumer is becoming quite cognizant of nutritional profiles, and claims that are made without being validated by legitimate organizations is not just taken for granted, actually. And that's where I think you're finding that whether it's generational, accelerated by the pandemic or so, you're finding the consumer, there's that behavioral economics that's actually guiding and influencing what's actually being offered to our consumers.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think the sustainability is a process that's win-win-win, more than 2, 3, about people, planet and profit, or is it more of a zero-sum game that we're playing here? Because you talked about trade-offs,
yes,
Roberto. So are there going to be losers as we become sustainable, as organisations become sustainable?
Yes. So I think there are going to be massive transfers. So let me talk about a couple of things here. So first and foremost, almost everything that we measure relative to environmental, social, and governance are what we call negative externalities. These are actions that we take that harm others. So by construction, that is a world where some group is being hurt. Okay, so I want to start from that starting point, that some group is already being hurt. So CO2 is hurting, the future generations and so on. So, maybe the group doesn't exist today as we know it, but the group exists. So we are hurting someone. Changing our behavior will imply a transfer. Now, this is not a zero-sum game in the sense that the world will be better off. The welfare of the world, when you compare, 1,000 years moving forward, will improve. So behaving properly will make the welfare of the world better. But we are going to have transfers. And the transfer is implicitly from some of the groups that are benefiting today from those actions to the groups that we're hurting today with our actions. So in the end, yes, there will be enough wealth to be shared, but some groups are going to be hurt. So, all the coal plants, these are very regional. There are a lot of workers that have skills that are very specific about, coal mining. We have to close some of those coal mines. Those individuals are going to be hurt for sure. And actually assuming that they are not going to be hurt, that there's no transfers that need to be made, I think it's a mistake. So we need to make sure that when we take these actions, we think about the groups that are more vulnerable. And again, more vulnerable might be something that is not your standard more vulnerable. Is that clear? So, and oversimplifying the problem by saying, I just need to skill them again and teach them how to do programming. Well, I don't know. We're in a university, but I'm telling you, teaching 20-year-old people at MIT is super easy. Is that clear? Because I have to do nothing. In fact, actually, I do, most of the day, I actually do nothing. This is what senior faculty do. Is that okay? We fake that we're working, but truly, we're not working. We just go there and say, why don't you read this paper and tell me what is wrong about the paper? See you next week. And then they come with 200 ideas, okay? And you say, wow, that's a great idea. Let's write a paper together. I write a paper together. I get 100% of the credit, and they do 100% of the work. Is that clear? That's how we teach people in universities. Is that clear? Because teaching 20-year-old people is like super easy, okay? They are super motivated, and you just have to tell them some crap about, oh, we can make the world all together better, and then they just go around and then kill everybody. Is that okay? They do the work for you. Teaching a 50-year-old is a painful process for the 50-year-old person and for the teacher. Is that clear? Because the 50-year-old is super stubborn, okay? And I am 60, so I'm more stubborn than them. So it's just, there's no way to communicate. So thinking that you're going to take a 45-year-old coal mining worker and you're going to reskill them and then they will become a great Python programmer, give me a break. Okay, that is the statement from someone that has never ever taken a bus or a metro in their life. Just actually go out in reality and realize how difficult it is to teach a 50-year-old person. And by the way, for the young people in the audience, that is the biggest business opportunity you will have. Is that clear? You want to become billionaire? Just go out and find a way how to teach the old, new things. And by the way, whatever it is, because because I'm giving you the idea, I only take 10%. Is that okay? But become a billionaire by transforming the labor force. And we need to transform it urgently. There are many sectors that will disappear as we know them today. Air travel needs to stop. Absolutely need to stop. And we need to travel 1/10 of what we travel. What that means is that many people that take that right for granted, that I can go from here to Bali to vacation, I'm sorry, that will be a luxury. And what that means is that there's several people that will not be able to take that vacation because we don't have a substitute for travel, and therefore you need to travel less.
So you'll be kayaking to us next time.
Yes. No, I'm traveling less. I'm picking, and so I'm picking more of the places. But it is a case that we all need to travel less. And this is so webinars is a very good way to have the communication. It just happens to be that I was here. That's why I'm here in Brisbane. Yeah. So I kayak from Sydney.
So, Saga, there's clearly a big spectrum in understanding out there in the world around what's possible and how it might happen. So what are some of the conversations that you have with the partners that you work with, particularly in agriculture?
Absolutely. Let's start off with water as a resource. I'm sure that who would have dreamt that and thought about the fact that we'll be paying more for water than we pay for fuel that goes into our vehicle. There's only 2.5% of the amount of water on Earth that's fresh. 70% of that is locked up in the Antarctic ice caps. And of whatever is left, 60 to 70% is used by agriculture. So the concept of just growing everything in broad acre is just not sustainable. In fact, the foods for convenience, like the nicely washed lettuce, the bags that you buy off the supermarket shelves, by the time you're actually purchasing them, they're probably ready to be thrown away. Because nutritionally, from the time you excise it from the plant has already perceived that there's no reason to remain alive. It self-destructs and initiates programmed cell death. So the nutritional profile, without a doubt, is actually, something that really, as a colleague of mine says, you're better off eating the packet than the actual lettuce itself. So what do? We bring the production of those leafy vegetables closer to where it's being consumed. As simple as that, actually. And look at how we could reduce the dependency of water to be able to deliver on it. Do we need so much of nitrogen fertilizer in that? Let's go back 65,000 years. You find the integration of aquaculture into food production was an integral part, because a lot of aquaculture produces nitrogenous waste that feeds into that. So you are now looking at the circularity of this space that actually presents us with more sustainable options. So these are the conversations that we are having. And another matter that has not been raised is about soil health, This is something else that, I think it's a huge worry, actually. We don't have the quality of soils to be able to sustain the kind of agricultural practices. And we need to think of smarter ways in which we could do that. So,
Yeah, I've got to say, I think a lot about water, and particularly the idea that we flush it, fresh water, we flush it down the toilet continuously all day, when some people have no access to it at all. I think it is just willful and wrong. There are alternative methods. I'll just get off my bandwagon there. So there's, Saga, there's a question for you around Australian bush food, and that the industry is beginning to grow $50 million per annum, yet only a tiny percent is led by Indigenous people. How can we disrupt that? What do we need to do?
Absolutely. The Kelvin Grow example, Kelvin Grow State College is one step, creating a greater awareness of those indigenous foods, and also be mindful that we rely too heavily on monocultures, and there's wild relatives of many of these species of plants that we utilize that's actually been used by our indigenous communities, not just in Australia, but across the globe. We need to enhance the genetic diversity of our crops to allow them to become more resilient to cope with the climate change and all the other challenges. In terms of indigenous knowledge systems around foods, you just got to read Bruce Pascoe's book, Dark Emu, to realize what a rich biodiversity we have out there that we have rarely been just scratching the surface. I had the opportunity in South Africa, growing up in the eastern part, we couldn't afford to have potatoes in our dishes. We would use a type of potato called madumbes. It's a type of taro. Maybe my forebearers were aware that it had better nutritional profiles. That's why we actually used it. Lower GI, much more anthocyanins, etc. I invited the CEO of Woolies to a community in Umbumbulu, which is just the Gatton equivalent of the eastern part of South Africa. And I said, here's these 5,000 families that are growing this technically organically and sustainably, because they were not putting in any fertilizers and any pesticides and herbicides. And to cut a long story short, you could go to any Woolies in South Africa, you will find madumbes from Umbumbulu on their shelves. This is socializing something which has got better nutritional profiles, but used by indigenous communities for what you would refer to as, not hundreds, but thousands of years, actually. I think we need that type of disruption in order to be able to socialize these into our diets. And in doing so, we could help create that economic prosperity. But it has to occur with an indigenous engagement, and we need to actually be welcome to country to be able to progress those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a lot of the commentary around sustainability, there's the concept that's bandied about of being lead or be led. And it raises the question for me, is sustainability in organisations and their approach to sustainability, is it a question of management? Is it a management challenge to address, or is it an innovation challenge to be addressed?
I should answer yes. I think that every challenge in humankind needs management and technology. I think it needs both. I mean, I don't think anyone can actually solve the problem just with one. I mean, in COVID, the lockdown is management. The vaccine is technology. And then changes in practice about our behavior, that's management. Mm-hmm. So all the big challenges in our life, they need both tools in different degree. Mm-hmm. We are consuming in excess. I mean, a lot of what Saga is referring to is yes, we need to bring the food to be closer to the consumer, which means that you might not get Chilean crepes. I mean, so that kind of because they don't seem to be too close to the consumer here, no? So there has to be to solve these sustainability challenges, we need management. So we need people to understand what are the consequences of their behavior, either by by the fact that we documented with a disclosure, or you put a tax, a carbon tax on transportation, whatever you want. But in some sense, they need to understand the consequences of the behavior. That's the management part. But then the technology part is, well, how we do this restorative agriculture that will make the production better for the soil and better for the environment. So I think that we need both, and there are different industries that will have different restrictions. For example, I think that mining, transportation need a lot of technology. I don't think we can change too much our behavior, for example. On food, for example, I think that the management is on the waste. In the United States, households waste 30% of their food. Now, 30%, is that big or bad? If I take all the food that has been wasted in the United States in the households, we can feed Brazil. That sounds like a lot of waste. Okay, so by the way, if we reduce that to a half, then we only feed Argentina, Peru, and Colombia. Okay, so just like the sheer magnitude of the waste is entirely management. There's no technology that can help you there. The consumer needs to, understand, just throw less. I mean, buy what you eat. No, don't make an excess. So, or eat your leftovers. Learn how to do that. So you see, I actually think that we need both here. So, and there are some areas that you need more management and some areas that you need more technology. So electrification is a lot about technology.
So there are a number of questions here that point to the fact that we say we want to do things, but the investment doesn't seem to be following. So there's a comment here about companies spending money to buy back stock. Now the share price is low rather than investing in research and development. Or another one around the case of labour abuse, the profitability is over 150 billion US annually, and yet the amount set aside globally to fight modern slavery is less than $1 billion.
Yeah.
So how do we turn that around? What are some practical pieces that we can pick up and use that turns that conversation a bit, helps shift the dial around sustainability?
I think in addition to what we've talked about, we need strong leadership. Yeah. We need at least us to be on the same hymn sheet and set these targets that allow us to start to actually, they could be aspirational, but at least we know that we are actually moving towards dealing with them. Some of these issues and challenges will be quite local. I've been dealing with an NGO in Bangladesh where the quality of water is so poor that folks are filtering that several times before they could even get it to a quality where they could drink it. But yet, for a country that produces so much of rice, we could take all of their rice husks, convert it into graphene-like carbon, and in one passing create drinkable water. But access to that technology, but also a will to be able to make a difference there, could actually help tip this. But it requires an investment. It requires an investment, and it requires investment at various levels, clearly from corporates, but I think even governments need to actually prioritize and ensure that there's at least a certain percentage of GDP is actually contributing towards innovation and R&D that could lead to such outcomes.
Yeah.
Let me tackle the human trafficking one. It is correct. I don't know how many of you know, but there are about 52 million people right now that live in what we call modern slavery. 52 million. So that's twice the population of your country has been enslaved. About 22 to 23 million is what we call is forced marriages, which I'm not going to discuss. I will treat that separately. But that means that it's about 28 to 30 million people that actually are working on forced labor. So they are working on fisheries, they are working on mining, they're deforestation. About 1.5 million is in sex, which is the one that makes it to the news. All the others are very rarely in the news. It is correct, the number that the person said is $150 billion of actual profits per year. So let me rephrase that. This is 3 times the profits made by Apple, the most profitable company on earth. $150 billion a year needs the 12 most profitable companies on earth added to be of the same size of just human trafficking. Okay, that's the sheer magnitude of this. Is that clear? Like Apple is a loser in comparison to this business. And we devote almost no resources to that. I think that a lot of that happens because we vote, we make decisions on budgets based on our awareness of the problem. And we are not aware. For example, because I work on this, let me just tell you a snippet and then I finish with this. One thing that I love about Australia is how you sell your shrimp. And I pay attention to this. And my wife goes with me to all these places and she says, like, I cannot imagine we're on vacation and you're actually paying attention to this. I said, yeah, because my life is to pay and measure this. You sell the shrimp with the head and the vein and all the dirt inside, super dirty. That's beautiful. Because the shrimp that has been actually sold that way have almost 0% chance of being actually processed by someone who's a slave. The shrimp that are cleaned, deveined, beheaded, have about a 30% chance that action, the cleaning, the deveining, was happening because a slave in the middle of South Asia was in a boat cleaning that. Their life expectancy for those people are 25-year-old. So about 60% of this audience should be dead if you were working air. So don't buy the shrimp that is cleaned. If we were able to tell humankind how the slavery impacts the products that they buy, you will change your behavior. Buy the dirty one, the one that you have to spend hours cleaning the bastard, beheading. Buy the shrimp that you hate to buy. Is that clear? It's more expensive, it's hard work. And you know what? What we did? We have 3 kids at home. We train them to clean them. So my wife says that instead of having the child labor in the boat of South Asia, we have the child labor at home, okay, cleaning and deveining. And all my kids are expert now. Now my kids are 28, 26, and 23, so they left home. And the reason why they left home is they said, we don't want to continue cleaning your shrimp. But they learned to clean their own shrimp, okay? So just get it done. And so if we were able to transmit that information, that market will be hurt. Law enforcement has very little chance to work here, very little chance.
Yeah. So on the shrimp as we're coming towards Christmas, think about that one. But we are heading to the top of the hour and we have Professor Scott Stern from MIT on the line who is going to say a few words. I'm sure we haven't touched all of your questions. There are some fantastic questions that have come in, but over to you, Scott, to close out this webinar series.
Well, first, let me thank you, Rowena, and both of the panelists for just a stimulating and fascinating discussion. I sort of want to have everybody at least give them a round of applause before I get their camera on here for a moment. As Rowena mentioned at the top of the hour, this is part of a longer series. And I feel like this particular discussion, in some sense, might, it's hard to bring together an agrobiotechnologist, right, or an agronomist and an economist who are both coming at these questions with deep expertise and knowledge, with a passion for change, but also with a passion to move beyond their traditional disciplinary boundaries, their traditional lens, and really get at them deeper and more foundational issues facing our society. This is the end of the third of our 3-part webinar. So this is actually the 9th webinar in this series over the last year. Really, this entire webinar came out of the pandemic, and it's something that I just think has stimulated a tremendous amount of reflection, ongoing collaboration, and most importantly, hopefully, us to think differently. Most notably, let me just kind of finish by just mentioning one or two things, which is when I think about the conversation you just heard, the thing that comes to mind, I think many of the comments brought this out, is that I feel like one commonality between QUT and MIT is a pragmatic commitment to the truth. That when people see problems, we go solve them. We go measure them. We go address and problem solve around them. And within this webinar series, where we featured the innovative enterprise, the entrepreneurial enterprise, and the sustainable enterprise, I feel like in each of those discussions, we were able to capture the commonality, an approach that's not like all universities. Pragmatic approach to problem solving, rigor, but ultimately trying to scale that rigor in the real world. I'm going to close on that. I want to thank the entire team at QUT, Gemma and her entire team. I want to thank global programs here, Stu and Marco and Dave and others. And I want to thank Rowena in particular for being this great continuing collaborator in our partnership with QUT. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That ends our webinar series. Please watch out for an announcement around a new series in 2023, but also for an invitation to a LinkedIn group to continue the conversations, because not all your questions were answered. I wish you all a very happy holiday season, and thank you again.